Tonight you do not begin with treasure. You begin with a dock. That is the first correction pirate life makes for you, long before the cutlass, the storm, the legend, or the map with its theatrical little X. There is only a warped stretch of timber breathing above black water, and your own worn boots testing each plank as if it might refuse to hold you. The harbour is quiet in the tired way of places that have already spent their anger for the day. A lantern swings at the end of a post. Tar shines in the seams of the boards. Somewhere farther inland, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The tide noses against the pilings with a patient, sleepless sound. It would be easy, standing here, to imagine that the sea is inviting. From a distance, it so often does look that way. It catches a little moonlight. It softens edges. It makes hard men seem romantic and bad choices seem almost noble. But you know better already, or at least you suspect you should. A month ago, you might have listened more eagerly to the promises. Freedom, shares of plunder, a life with no landlord, no overseer, no magistrate, no master of any sort except the horizon itself. It is the kind of dream that reaches a man most easily when he is hungry, and you have been hungry long enough for the dream to find room in you. Hunger clears furniture from the mind. It stacks pride by the door. It leaves behind a small hard space where a foolish hope can sit and make itself at home. So when a sailor with broken nails and a voice steeped in rum told you that a fast ship needed one more pair of hands, you nodded before your better sense had time to dress itself. Now the ship waits just beyond the lantern glow, and it does not look like freedom. It looks damp, it looks narrow, it looks held together by rope, labour, and an old agreement with disaster. Its hull wears scratches and salt scars. Its rigging hangs in a dark lace against the sky. There is no music aboard, no laughter fit for memory, only a lamp near the stern and the faint suggestion of movement from men who have not slept enough and do not expect to begin tonight. If this voyage keeps you company in the dark, you can always return to it another night. For now there is nothing you need to do but walk a little farther with it. Let the dock go on creaking beneath you. Let the water keep its slow old rhythm. Let the mind loosen its grip on whatever land-bound thing it was holding before you arrived here. The harbour smells of fish scales, spilled ale, old rope, and distant rot. Yet beneath even that there is the cleaner note of salt, and it is that note your tired imagination follows. You stand still for a moment and look at the ship the way a man looks at a door when he already knows he is going through it. Not because he trusts the room beyond, only because there is nowhere else left worth entering. Around you, the port has that late-hour hush in which every sound feels singular. A gull shifts in sleep, somewhere metal taps wood, a coil of line thumps lightly against a post. Little things, small harbour noises, almost gentle ones. You tell yourself that this is the last quiet piece of land you may know for some time, and that thought should frighten you more than it does. Instead, it makes you feel strangely hollow and light. Perhaps that is what happens when life on shore has worn you down enough. You do not board a pirate ship because you are brave. You board because the life behind you has already taught you that safety is not the same thing as mercy. There are others on the dock as well, though at first they look more like loose shadows than men. A narrow fellow with a stitched sleeve squats beside a barrel and shaves curls from a bit of wood with a knife that must once have been finer. A broad-backed man carries 2 sacks of something that clinks like bottles or buckles. Another leans against a post with his hat low and his chin to his chest, half asleep standing up. No one greets you, no one needs to. Everyone here knows why men come to a ship at this hour. Not for joy, not for a sermon, not for an honest wage that arrives on time and stays where it belongs. At the end of the dock stands the one who signed you on in daylight. He looked almost comic in his confidence, as if he had been assembled from every tavern story you were foolish enough to enjoy. A sun-browned face, 2 silver hoops in one ear, a hand that never quite stopped gesturing when he spoke of islands, guns, and Spanish coin. Tonight he looks smaller, tired. His coat is greener with mildew than it seemed before. His smile, when it appears, is made entirely of habit. He does not ask whether you are ready. Men who ask that question are still pretending choice matters. He only jerks his chin toward the waiting vessel and says, in a voice pitched low, so as not to disturb the harbour, that the tide will not hold for cowards. But the line is cheap, but it does its work. You shift your bundle higher under your arm and move. The gangplank rises to meet you with a complaint in every board. Beneath it, the harbour water thickens into shadow. You can smell the ship before you are on it. Wet timber, pitch warmed and cooled 1,000 times, stale fabric, trapped sweat, cask water, and the particular sourness of men who labour too close together. None of it is theatrical, none of it resembles the bright lie sold in taverns. But there is honesty in a bad smell. It asks nothing from the imagination. It simply arrives halfway across. You hear a voice from the deck say that another stray has found the kennel. There is a ripple of tired amusement. You do not look up. There are moments in life when dignity is mostly a matter of continuing to place one foot in front of the other. This is one of them. When you reach the top, the deck gives slightly beneath your weight, as if the ship is testing you back. The planks are damp with mist or spray, or whatever the sea leaves behind, when it wants to remind men that it is always in contact with them. Coils of line lie like sleeping snakes near the mast. A lantern at the stern throws a dirty amber shine that makes every face seem older than it might in the sun. This is the first real sight you have of your new world, and it is smaller than you expected, harsher than you expected, and already somehow tired of you. That, more than anything, is what begins to calm you. The ship is not dramatic, it is simply real, and reality. Once it stops announcing itself, often settles into a rhythm you can follow. Someone takes your bundle before you can decide whether to offer it, and tosses it toward a hatch without looking. Someone else hands you a stiff rag and points you toward a patch of deck darker than the rest. The instruction is clear enough, even without words. If you are here, you work. If you hesitate, you work while being mocked. If you complain, you work while being despised. On a ship like this, efficiency is simply cruelty that has learned to conserve energy. The mate comes over after a while. He's a compact man with a neck burned dark by years of reflected sun, and a face that seems arranged from sharp pieces, all of them disinclined toward kindness. He asks your name, not because he wants to remember it, but because ships like this enjoy stripping a man of one thing at a time. When you tell him, he squints once, then says he has no use for a name longer than a rope splice. By tomorrow, he informs you, you will answer to whatever the deck decides you are. Until then, you are boy hand, fool, or you there, depending on how far away the speaker is and how annoyed he feels. This, too, has a strange way of soothing once the sting passes. A ship is not interested in your old life. It does not care what you were called ashore, who owed you money, who broke your trust, who buried your mother, who cheated you, who laughed when you failed. The sea is merciless in part because it is uninterested. It takes no pleasure in stripping a man down. It simply leaves no room for whatever is not useful. Your hammock, when at last someone points it out, hangs below in a low, crowded stretch of gloom that smells as if wet wood itself has learned to breathe badly. You descend by ladder into air that feels immediately thicker, more human, less forgivable. Canvas sags overhead between beams blackened by age and smoke. Oil. Hammocks swing gently, even while the ship is still tied up, moved by draft, movement, breathing, memory. They hang so close that you imagine, if all the men aboard stretched an arm at once, they could knit their sleep together into one damp, miserable net. Yours is near the bow, where the boards sweat and the darker corners belong mostly to rats, lice and private thoughts a man prefers not to share. You sit in it carefully and feel at once how little space there is for any comfortable version of yourself. The fabric pinches, the knots groan, the ship answers with a small motion from somewhere beneath you, as if reminding you that this is only the beginning of how it intends to move. A man in the next hammock rolls over, scratches his ribs through his shirt, and mutters that if you spew on his boots, he will feed you to the dawn. Then he goes back to snoring with the complete devotion of the truly exhausted. Above deck, there is a final burst of activity. Lines hauled, voices crossing, the low thud of something heavy being shifted into place. You hear the harbour one last time through the hatch. Distant water against stone, a clank of chain, a sleepy call from another vessel. Then the sounds alter, not all at once, just enough. The ship loosens from the dock. You feel it more than hear it, a release along the hull, a change in weight, a slow choosing of water over land. The hammock beneath you begins to move in a new pattern. No longer from men passing or boards flexing, but from the sea itself. There are larger lives than your own taking hold now. Tides, current, wind. They do not ask your opinion. You do not sleep so much as drift between discomforts. Every time you near rest, something recalls you. A boot overhead, a cough thick as broth, a rat skittering along the beam. The hammock slow tilt left, then right, then a deeper rolling pause that seems to ask whether your stomach would like to reconsider its loyalties. In that not quite sleep, you think of what people on shore imagine pirate nights to be. Singing, cards, rum, the free company of dangerous men under stars. Perhaps sometimes that existed. On this first night, however, there is only wood, breath, mildew, and the slight panic of a body realizing it has given up solid earth. Morning comes not with sunrise, but with command. A voice cuts through the deck and down the hatch like a thrown hook. Men rise at once, not because they are willing, but because routine has already hardened around them. You tumble half awake into your boots and climb into a wind that smells cleaner than the air below, but no less severe. Dawn is colourless at first, the sky merely a thinning of dark over flat water. The land behind you is gone. That should startle you more than it does. Perhaps because the sea, once it surrounds you, is so complete that it allows no room for the idea of elsewhere. Your first meal arrives in a wooden bowl, with no ceremony and almost no scent. The contents are grey in the apologetic way of food that has endured more storage than cooking. You take a cautious mouthful. It tastes of oats, salt, smoke, and maybe old caskwood. There is something hard in it that you choose not to identify. A man across from you tells you that if you keep stopping to think about what you eat out here, you will starve with exquisite self-respect. Another replies that self-respect is not filling enough for a working morning. A few men laugh into their bowls. The laughter is not merry, but it is human, and because of that, it lands more warmly than you expected. Then the work begins in earnest. There is always rope first, rope to coil, rope to carry, rope to free from knots that appear to have been tied by weather, rather than hands. Then canvas, then water barrels, then scraping, then swabbing, then hauling again, because something that seemed in place a moment ago has decided not to remain there. Ships are kingdoms of recurrence. Every task performed is merely a task introduced. The deck grows slick under spray, your palms redden, then burn. Then, accept that burn as a detail rather than a complaint. The mate corrects you twice with language imaginative enough to suggest he has spent years refining it for clumsy young men. The third time, he only snatches the line from your hands, demonstrates the movement in silence, and hands it back. That silence stings more, though it also teaches better. By noon, you understand that the fantasy of pirate freedom is not destroyed by battle. It is destroyed by maintenance. Freedom, aboard a sea-going vessel, looks very much like never finishing your chores. And yet, because monotony has its own narcotic properties, the body begins to fold itself into the rhythm. Lift, pull, brace, wipe, turn, listen, duck, repeat. The sea alongside flashes and darkens, flashes and darkens. The sail above gives one long breath and fills again. The boards answer every footstep with a low, ongoing murmur. If you stop resisting the repetition, it almost carries you. Not kindly, but steadily. Near evening, the light softens in a way you would not have thought possible on a ship that smells this strongly of men and old fish. The western sky goes from brass to amber to a diluted rose that looks too delicate for such a coarse world. Even the mate stops shouting for a few minutes, as if sunset is one of the few authorities aboard to which he is willing to defer. The water smooths, the horizon glows. For the briefest stretch of time, the whole vessel seems less a prison than a moving island of quiet labour. This is the part no one bothers to mention when they frighten boys with sea stories or seduce them with sea stories. Not the violence, not the plunder, not the sickness, but this strange pause in which the ship breathes out, and every man aboard, however foul-tempered or worn, is returned for a moment to the plain fact of being alive beneath a very large sky. You stand with your raw hands resting on the rail and let that feeling pass through you. Then the cook bangs a ladle against a pot hard enough to wake the dead, and the spell breaks cleanly in two Sioux. The cook is called Mr. Vale, though no one uses the honorific unless they want to risk a spoon to the forehead. He is broad around the middle, bald on top, and permanently glossed with sweat, as though the galley fire follows him in spirit even when he is elsewhere. He serves hard biscuit that could chip a tooth, strips of meat salted into a second life, and stews whose ingredients have surrendered all individual identity. Yet in a world where your next meal depends largely on his mood, he is treated with a careful respect ordinarily reserved for priests and armed idiots. You learn quickly that authority aboard a pirate vessel wears more than one face. The captain may command the course, the mate the labour, but the cook controls one of the only mercies that can still be ladled. By the third day, the ship has taught your body a new clock. You wake before shouting now, or rather just before it, in that thin grey interval when the men around you are still snoring and the deck above is only beginning to stir. Those moments are the closest thing aboard to privacy. The air below remains sour, but it is quieter sourness. The hammocks murmur as they swing. A beam ticks softly with the coolness before dawn, somewhere unseen. Water knocks the hull in a small repeating rhythm, like a patient hand at a closed door. You lie still in your strip of canvas and learn the shape of the darkness. The hanging boots, the seam where one plank never quite meets another. The faint paler square where the hatch will soon open and spill down a little light along with orders. Then the day warms and the ship becomes human again. It is hard to explain to anyone who has not lived among 30 men and no privacy how quickly the senses tire of complaint and move on to endurance. The smell that shocked you on the first night no longer arrives as a single assault. It breaks into layers: wet rope, unwashed shirts, tallow. The sharpness of stale urine from the head when the wind turns wrong. Bilgy damp below everything, thick as a second atmosphere. Mould working quietly in the corners, grease smoke clinging to the galley boards, fish oil, tar, salt, the sweet sick note of old bruises on skin. Once these separate themselves, they become almost manageable. A man can endure many miseries so long as he can sort them. Your shirt is never fully dry now. It goes from damp with spray, to damp with sweat, to damp with the night air, and back again. You discover that the luxury is not cleanliness, but choosing which side of a garment feels less offensive against the body. The others perform similar calculations without comment. One man hangs his coat over a line and beats it with the seriousness of a religious rite, raising more dust and lice than improvement. Another rubs his neck with a twist of lemon peel, saved from some old port and passed around the ship until it is nearly imaginary. The scent lingers for only seconds, but every man within range turns his head toward it, as if toward music. That is when you first understand how precious freshness becomes at sea. Not comfort, not wealth, freshness. A cool draft through the hatch, a shirt that wants new soap, water that does not taste of barrel, a slice of fruit. These become less luxuries than evidence that the world still contains grace somewhere, however badly distributed. Sleep remains a negotiation. Some nights the ship is gentle enough to rock you into a half-dream, in which the creak of wood and the wash along the hull become one long woven sound, and you float in it as in a cradle designed by a cruel carpenter. Other nights, every motion arrives crooked. A bigger roll tips you against the man beside you. A sudden lurch knocks a boot from somewhere overhead. Someone coughs until he retches. Someone speaks in a dream. Someone snores like a saw, dragged through wet oak. Lice work patiently in the seams of your clothes, and at odd hours your own hand will rise in sleep to scratch at neck, waistband, ankle, wrist, as if it no longer belongs to you. By morning you wake marked by the little red signatures of things too small to hate properly. The head, when you finally become forced enough to use it in rough water, destroys what remained of your youthful vanity. It is little more than a plank thrust out where the sea may do the final carrying away. Timing matters, balance matters, luck matters more than you would prefer. The older hands mock no one during this lesson, because every man aboard has had the sea try to make a fool of him there. One offers the only comfort available. That shame washes off faster than filth, provided you do not fall in after it. Days lengthen through repetition. You patch sail under a sun that seems to reach down specifically for the back of your neck. You haul a cask with another man and feel the joints in your arms complain in a language older than thought. You scrape old scales from a cutting board, you sort hooks, you wipe fish slime from a rail, only for more to appear. The mate no longer notices you except when something is done badly, which is its own rough promotion. To be ignored aboard ship means you have become part of the machine, another plank in motion, another sound among sounds. The crew itself resolves slowly from a blur of insults into separate souls. There is Mercer, who has only 3 good teeth and keeps them polished with the dignity of a gentleman, maintaining silver. There is Flint Ned, whose nose was broken enough times that it now points toward whatever weather he distrusts most. There is little Bram, scarcely older than you, who can climb rigging with a bucket in his teeth and still find breath to complain. There is old Harker, who never removes his cap and speaks only when cards are involved, which gives the impression that he is saving all his language for dishonesty. And there is Elias Rook, the captain, tall in the spare way of men, who have burned everything unnecessary out of themselves. His coat always buttoned, though the heat begs otherwise, his face unreadable, except in those brief moments when he squints towards some far point at sea, and seems to become more a function than a person. He is not a theatrical tyrant. This disappoints you at first. You had expected some thunderous creature with a scar under one eye and a laugh fit for tavern retellings. Instead, Rook is precise, worse than cruel perhaps, because cruelty at least provides heat. He moves quietly, he wastes no words, men make room when he passes, not because he reminds them to, but because their bodies have learned the wisdom of it. Once, early in the week, a sailor too slow to answer a command receives not a blow but a look. The man turns redder than if he had been struck. The lesson is somehow more effective for its softness. Still, the captain cannot fully erase the old strange beauty of evening. Each dusk, the work slackens by necessity, if not generosity, and the sea grows level enough for a man to forget, for 2 or 3 breaths, how close to chaos he lives. The sky broadens, flying fish break the surface like handfuls of thrown silver. Salt dries white at the cuffs of every shirt. Men sit where they can and chew in silence. Someone mends a sleeve, someone oils a knife, someone closes his eyes and lets the wind cool his face, as though wind alone might count as rest. In those pauses, the ship becomes almost tender, not because it is safe, because it is briefly still understandable. Plank, mast, sail, rope, men, water, sky, a small enough world to hold in the mind without panic. You begin to see why some sailors, even miserable ones, return to sea after reaching shore. Hardship, repeated long enough, can simplify life until its very simplicity feels like peace. Then night thickens, the hatch closes, the air below sours again, and the rats resume their private kingdom under the boards. A week into the voyage, you stop asking yourself how much worse it can get, not because the answer is reassuring, but because the question wastes strength. The ship will tell you what comes next in its own time. It always does. Your task is smaller. Rise when called. Learn the line before it burns your hand. Secure what must be secured. Eat what is given. Sleep where there is room. Save complaint for the inside of your own skull. In this way the days collect. With routine comes talk, and with talk, the slow education a green hand never receives on his first night. Pirate crews, you discover, are stitched from different failures than the kind people ashore prefer to discuss. There are men here who fled Navy ships where the lash was quicker than prayer. Men who found merchant wages too thin to keep up with their bones. Men who ran from plantations, prisons, creditors, husbands, magistrates, brothers, and in 2 cases, almost certainly from weddings. There is no single road into piracy, only a great many roads out of ordinary misery. That truth settles over the deck more gently than you expected. These are not monsters hatched whole from rumour. They are men whom one form of cruelty has pushed toward another. Some speak of it openly in the dog watch when labour eases. Mercer, says a Navy captain, once docked him a month's pay for sneezing in the wrong moment, and afterward had the nerve to call discipline a moral necessity. Bram admits he signed onto a privateer at 12 because he preferred powder smoke to his father's cane. Parker, after losing 3 rounds of cards, and perhaps forgetting his own rule about silence, says nothing specific, but makes a shape in the air with his fingers that could mean a judge's rope or a wife's temper, or both. They tell these histories without asking sympathy. At sea, a past is not a plea. It is just a reason you happen to be where you are. The ship itself is governed less simply than you first thought. There is command, yes, Orders run downward fast enough, and the mate's voice could peel paint. But there are also customs, quiet balances, permissions that are not written and yet somehow hold. The quartermaster keeps inventory and watches the division of food with an attention that would do honor to a banker. When water is rationed, men count not only their own share, but the fairness of their neighbor's share. When cards are played for tobacco or thread, disputes may be argued with surprising seriousness before anyone reaches for a blade. The captain chooses course and action in dangerous moments, but there are other matters in which his will must at least glance toward the temper of the crew, if he wishes to keep that crew from turning weathered and complicated around him. You find yourself thinking about this more than you expected, perhaps because it feels like history whispered from the inside, rather than explained by some dry hand on shore. You had imagined pirate life as pure disorder. Instead, it is another system, only rougher, more personal, and nearer the edge of open violence. Even lawlessness, it seems, requires rules about where the spoons are kept and who gets the bigger biscuit when supplies run thin. The quartermaster, Jonah Pike, is the clearest emblem of this truth. He is thick through the chest, slow in movement, slow in speech, and so impossible to hurry that even the mate gives up trying. At first you mistake that slowness for stupidity, then you see how people bring disputes to him. A missing knife, a question of whether one cask has been watered more than another, a claim that a share promised in the last port has not reached the correct hands. Pike listens with his big scarred fingers folded over his knee, and his eyes lowered as though he is half asleep. Then he gives an answer nobody loves, but almost everyone accepts. It is not wisdom exactly, more a talent for making each man feel he has been seen before being disappointed. One night, while the moon lays a torn silver road across the water, and the deck is quiet, except for the little groans of settling timber, Pike finds you rubbing your wrists where the rope burns have reopened. He asks whether you still believe what you believed on the dock. You ask him which part. He says the part where this life looked free. You tell him you are beginning to think freedom may just be another word men use when they are too tired to describe the terms properly. He grunts, which on Pike passes for delight. Then he says the sea makes republics of desperate men. That is as close to philosophy as you hear from him, and because the remark arrives without performance, it stays. You turn it over in your mind in the following days. A republic of desperate men, yes, the phrase fits the ship better than any tavern fantasy. Here, men vote with mutters, loyalties, glances, appetite, hands withheld at the wrong moment. Here, authority is real, but never fully secure. Here, a man may be obeyed at noon and quietly measured for weakness by nightfall. The arrangement is not noble, it is simply practical. If too much rests on one temper, the whole vessel leans. That thought becomes easier to understand as provisions grow meaner. It begins subtly, the stew thins, the biscuit ration shortens by one hard mouthful. Mr. Vale curses more often over his pots, and emerges from the galley with the expression of a priest discovering heaven has cut his kitchen budget. Water tastes more sour from one barrel than another, suggesting some casks are older than they ought to be. Pike spends longer at the stores with his ledger, and no longer allows Bram to steal little pinches of salt for card game wagers. Men notice. Men always notice food before they notice policy. The strange thing is that life in the middle of the day, out under full sail, grows softer even as tempers begin to harden underneath. Perhaps it is simply that your own body has adjusted enough to stop resisting every small pain. The work remains hard, but now it is known hard. Your hands have begun to thicken. Your shoulder recognizes the pull before the line even tightens. The deck beneath your feet has ceased to feel unstable, and instead feels conversational, always telling you in tiny motions what the sea is doing. You can almost lose yourself in the labor. There is a peculiar mercy buried inside such toil, repetition so complete that thought begins to loosen and drift around it. You spend an afternoon scraping the main rail while the sun climbs and falls and climbs again through broken cloud. Salt dries on your forearms. The knife in your hand moves in a slow, regular rhythm. Behind you, men coil line, patch canvas, sort hooks. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing memorable enough for history. Yet this may be the truest part of pirate life. Not the raid, not the chase, not the gunsmoke, but the long sameness between such moments, the wooden hours on which all legends are secretly built. Late in that same afternoon, a small crate is carried across the deck under a bit of sailcloth and taken below to the captain's cabin. It might have been nails, it might have been gunflints, it might have been prayer books for all anyone says. Yet several pairs of eyes follow it longer than necessary. No one comments, not then, but the ship, which holds every rumour in its beams, has just been handed one more. By the time the second week settles over the ship, your hunger has changed shape. At first it was loud, theatrical, something that took up space and made demands. Now it is quieter, more competent. It lives low in the body. It speaks in small continuous signals. The bowl is not enough. The biscuit is not enough. The water is not enough. Yet you go on. Men can go on under astonishing deficits. Once continuing becomes simpler than imagining alternatives. The biscuit deserves its own chapter, though life aboard does not grant such luxuries. It arrives in square slabs, pale as old wood, and nearly as forgiving. The older hands tap each piece before biting, as if listening for structural weakness. You imitate them. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it only tells you which part will punish your teeth first. Weevils appear often enough that their presence no longer shocks. One man flicks them out, one by one, with the fussy care of a jeweler. Another shrugs and eats them as additional protein. Mr. Vale says only land people are wealthy enough to object to small moving ingredients. You suspect he has been waiting years to use that line. Salt meat fares little better once boiled and cut. It can resemble rope in both colour and spiritual effect. You chew and are eventually rewarded with the right to swallow. On days when Mr. Vale manages onions or a fistful of dried peas from the stores, morale rises in proportion to how strongly the galley smells of something almost fresh. It is absurd and entirely true that a pot with one honest vegetable in it can restore to men a belief in civilization. But the body knows the difference between almost fresh and fresh. It shows first in the mouths of the crew. A man spits pink over the rail and says the salt air is cutting him. Another presses a thumb against his gum and winces. Your own teeth begin to feel larger somehow, as if they no longer sit comfortably where nature put them. Bruises flower more easily. A bump from a barrel leaves a stain on the thigh that lingers like old ink. Scratches heal with laziness. The skin around your knuckles dries, splits and stings with every haul of rope. You mention none of it because everyone else looks equally half-ruined, and because the sea has a way of making private suffering feel embarrassingly unoriginal. Yet even in decline there are gradations. Pike watches the men with that slow cattle-buyer gaze of his and begins, you suspect, to tally who is weakening fastest. Mercer's cheeks sink more each day, though his 3 fine teeth still gleam absurdly when he grins. Bram hides a cough. Flint Ned has taken to rubbing his calves after the morning watch, as if his legs no longer trust him. Parker who once held his cards with steady fingers, drops them twice in one night and blames the lantern. Nobody believes him, nobody says so. You learn that disease at sea rarely arrives like a trumpet. It seeps, it thins, it persuades the body to surrender in inches, that knowledge is somehow more frightening for being so mild. A battle, at least, makes a clean kind of noise. Sickness works with whispers. And because the mind cannot live forever at that edge of worry, it begins to seek out little refuges. You find one near the foremast in the thin strip of shade that appears around midday, another by the starboard rail just after sunset, when the wind usually cools enough to carry away for a minute the trapped smell of men below. Sometimes, if you are sent to mend canvas in the afternoon, the task becomes almost meditative. Needle through sail, pull, knot, needle through sail, pull, knot. The huge fabric breathes around you with each shift of wind, and though your fingers ache, the repetition smooths the inner noise. A man can drift a little inside such labour, not sleeping exactly, but becoming less sharp around the edges. From there, the voyage grows gentler for a while, not because the ship improves, but because your perceptions become more selective. You notice more sky and less complaint, more long water and less cursing, the green of a distant current line, the silver wink of fish under the bows, the way cloud shadow moves over the sea, like some huge invisible hand, blessing and withdrawing in one motion. There is a narcotic quality to endless water when no land interrupts thoughts. It flattens urgency, even dread must stretch itself thin to fit so much horizon. Some evenings, after the bowls are scraped and the last chore before dark has loosened its grip, a kind of hush comes over the deck that feels almost ceremonial. Men settle where they can, a needle flashes in fading light. A pipe glows once, then again someone hums not to entertain, but because silence and melody are cousins and the body wants company. The ship slides on, sails full, then softer, then full again. In those hours you begin to understand the sea as an accomplice to sleep. Not kind, not maternal, nothing so sentimental, but rhythmic, patient, repetitive. It carries the mind the way the deck carries the feet, by insisting on motion until resistance seems pointless. Then there are the dreams of fruit. No one tells you they will come. No one needs to. Once the body goes without freshness long enough, the imagination turns greedy for colour. You start dreaming in oranges and green gold limes and split pomegranates and pears cold from cellars you have never seen. Not feasts, never feasts, just one piece, one slice, one honest burst of sharp sweet wetness on the tongue. You wake with your mouth full of phantom citrus, so vivid that the first swallow of barrel water feels like a personal insult. One dawn, while helping Pike inventory the remaining stores, you catch it for real. Not the sight, only the smell, faint, nearly lost beneath tar and damp cloth and old grain, but unmistakable. Orange peel, perhaps lemon, something bright, volatile, impossible. It slips through the cabin door as the captain emerges and is gone at once, devoured by the ship's usual odours. Yet every nerve in your body seems to follow it. Pike notices. His eyes slide toward you, then toward the closed door, then away again. He says nothing, neither do you. But when you climb back onto deck, the world feels altered by the brief proof that somewhere aboard, hidden from general misery, there may exist a sweetness not shared. Rumour does not need language at first, it only needs changes in posture. Mr. Vale counts rations twice with a jaw like stone. Bram asks too casually whether the captain has taken to eating in his cabin. Mercer, who notices everything edible by vocation, claims he saw a bit of green rind in the scupper after the morning watch. Flint Ned says nothing at all, which is the loudest reaction of the lot. No open resentment follows. Not yet. The ship goes on as ships do. Sails are trimmed, hooks are sharpened, a small fish is caught and cleaned and divided in portions too tiny for joy. But now an extra current runs beneath daily life. The idea of hidden fruit is not merely about taste. It is about fairness. It is about who gets to stay strong and who is expected to go soft in the gums while smiling through his labor. It is about whether necessity is shared or staged. You find yourself watching the captain more often, which is dangerous in a way difficult to measure. He continues as always, sparse words, exact commands, even temper held close as a knife. Yet now every movement toward his cabin acquires a second meaning. Every closed door becomes a question. Once, at dusk, you see him peel something, with his back half turned. A small curl of bright skin flashing in his hand before it disappears. He may be trimming a bit of cord, for all the certainty you possess. Yet the image lodges. Still, the sea insists on its own gentle lesson. After such moments, after the little inner jolt of resentment or curiosity, evening comes and smooths everything again. The horizon widens, the sky takes on bruised lavender near the east and molten brass in the west. The ship eases into the long soft breathing that belongs only to the hour before dark. Men lean their weight against rails, against masts, against whatever will hold them up without complaint. Somewhere nearby, a gull rides the wake and cries once. The sound thins into distance. You think of all the troubles aboard, and how briefly they matter against so much water. Not because they are small, but because the sea is endless enough to make every grievance float. Then the watch changes, boots shift overhead, someone curses at a knot, Mr. Vale calls for the empty bowls, and the gentle hour folds itself away like a map. No one here can read for long. After that, the ship becomes a place where people stop speaking half a breath earlier than they used to. It is not obvious at first, unless you are new enough to still listen. Old crews know how to hold two conversations at once, one in words and one in omissions. You notice them both now. A joke trails off when the captain crosses the deck. Bram and Mercer play cards in silence, one night after a week of bickering over every turn. Flint Ned begins taking his meals with his back to the rail rather than to the others, as if he prefers to trust the open sea more than the company behind him. Pike spends more time below with the store's ledger, and comes up wearing the look of a man who has counted something too carefully to remain cheerful. What makes the tension especially tiring is that outward life remains so ordinary. The wind still needs reading, the canvas still tears where canvas tears. Buckets still need hauling and deck seams still need caulking, and hooks still need sorting. A ship does not pause its practical needs to honour the drama of men. In that there is an odd comfort. Work continues to offer refuge from speculation. Pull this line, scrape this rail, mend this tier, carry this cask. The body is grateful for jobs whose meaning does not shift. Yet the mind shifts whether invited or not. One afternoon Pike sends you with him to fetch lamp oil from the after store. It is close work in a cramped space where every motion must respect the barrels, and because men speak differently when their shoulders nearly touch, you find yourself asking what happens if a crew stops trusting a captain. Pike takes a long time to answer, long enough that the barrel in your hands starts to feel more accusatory than heavy. At last he says, "Trust never stops all at once. It thins, like old cloth, like old gum. By the time it tears," he adds, "everyone aboard has already felt the draft." Then he tells you to lift with your knees unless you want your back to age before the rest of you. This, apparently, is all the warning you get. The captain, for his part, becomes quieter still. Perhaps he notices the currents around him. Perhaps he calls them and sees no need to pretend surprise. His cabin lantern burns later into the night than before. Twice you wake in the sour dark below and see a narrow golden line under the closed door above through some crack in the deck boards. Proof that he is up, while other men only mutter in their sleep. Once, during morning duties, you are sent to carry in a basin and catch again that bright, impossible scent. Fresher this time, openly citrus, a clean sting in the air that seems almost violent in such stale quarters. On the desk rests a knife, sticky with juice. Beside it, for less than a second before the captain's coat falls across your sight, you glimpse the thick curved side of an orange glowing like a private sun. You lower your eyes at once. He says, "Thank you," in a tone no captain should have. Too calm, too close to polite. The quietness of it unsettles you more than an oath would. You set down the basin, back out, and take with you, not the sight of the orange, but the shining wet smell of it, which clings to your imagination for the rest of the day. By supper, the whole ship seems to know. No accusation is made. That would require courage of the public sort, and ships train men first in the private kind. Instead, the bowls are accepted with less noise than usual. Men chew as if counting. Mr. Vale serves and does not meet the captain's eye. Bram breaks his biscuit in two and stares at the crumbs before eating them. A tiny study in disbelief. Mercer mutters that a fair captain keeps his men alive long enough to complain about him properly. Harker replies that fairness is the first cargo thrown overboard on any vessel short of provisions. Flint Ned, who has the gift of sounding casual while placing tinder near fire, asks whether oranges keep better in private cabins than in communal chests. Pike tells him the weather is fine for silence. Flint Ned obeys, but smiling. That night, the ship feels smaller, not physically. Morally, a hidden orange can do that. It can reduce ideals, codes, stories of shared hardship to one sharp and shining point. The resentment is not merely envy, it is arithmetic. If the captain kept this, what else has been kept? If freshness exists aboard, who decided which mouths were worth saving? At sea, a man's imagination grows strongest around rations and injustice. Both are simple enough to picture clearly. Still, because the mind cannot sustain a constant pitch without fraying, the ship gives you one of its gentler nights. The moon rises late. Before it does, darkness settles in a soft blue wash over the water. The wind drops, sails ease and whisper. The hull takes on that deep repetitive wash that can resemble breathing. If you are tired enough, and you are very tired, you stand the first part of the watch with Bram and say almost nothing. Far out in the black, there are pale lines where fish disturb the surface. Above, stars gather in such unreasonable number that for a little while it becomes hard to remember the captain, the oranges, the ledger, the thinning trust. There is only the ship moving through a field of reflected lights. Only the quiet labour of staying afloat, only the kind of fatigue that makes every thought seem wrapped in cloth. Bram leans on the rail and says, very softly, so as not to wake the sleeping deck, that he has not tasted fruit in 11 months. You ask how he knows, he says, because he has counted from a fever in Martinique that nearly took his teeth. He says it without bitterness, almost dreamily. Then he asks what you would do for one orange. You mean as trade? You ask. He says no, as truth. The question follows you below into the hammock. What would you do for one orange? Not steal a ship, not fight a navy, not brave a storm. Those are storybook answers. What would you do truly, with a body already worn thin, and a mouth remembering blood? How much of your sense of fairness would you surrender? How much risk would you accept? How much trouble would you call justice? It is a question small enough to fit in the palm, and dangerous enough to rearrange a crew. Sometime in the night, someone passes overhead with care not to wake the others. Then another. You lie still. The ship moves gently. A hammock rope creaks. Somewhere below, perhaps in the bilge, water slaps wood in the same old sleepy rhythm. It would almost be possible to believe the vessel itself is trying to soothe you, to rock you away from human schemes and back into the larger indifference of the sea. But men remain aboard, and morning returns them to motion. The next day brings no explosion. This is the thing people ashore misunderstand about mutiny. They imagine the deck splitting at once into shouted sides. Steel in sunlight, some grand theatrical choice. More often it starts in restraint. Men become helpful with unusual precision. Orders are obeyed, but just a moment slower than before. Tools go missing and reappear. Discussions cease when the mate approaches, then resume at once when he passes. Pike and the captain speak in low voices by the quarterdeck for long enough that even the gulls seem interested. Mr. Vale burns a pot because he is watching the wrong hatch. Life grows more careful and therefore more exhausting. And yet, in the middle of all this, the sea remains beautiful in deeply inconsiderate ways. At noon, a warm current lifts the ship, and for nearly an hour flying fish scatter from the bows in silver bursts, bright enough to make Bram laugh despite everything. The sky clears after noon into a blue so wide it seems to wash thought clean. Somewhere along the horizon, a rain squall stands in a grey column like a curtain separating one world from another. You watch it with an almost grateful concentration, glad for weather that asks nothing of ethics. By evening, the breeze freshens. Rook inspects the rigging himself. His coat snaps lightly at the hem. He appears no more troubled than a mast, no more expressive than canvas. If he fears his crew, he keeps that fear in the same hidden store as the oranges. You wonder whether he believes control is merely a matter of standing straighter than hunger. Below deck night, before the lantern is doused, Mercer says to no one in particular that men have put knives into each other for less than appeal. No one answers him, yet no one tells him he is wrong. The storm announces itself first through manners. The air grows more formal. Voices flatten, even the habitual quarrels aboard seem to tuck in their elbows and make room for something larger. Near noon, the light changes to a strange metallic brightness that drains warmth from every colour without darkening them. The sea, which all morning has moved in long glazed folds, begins to tense. Not rough, yet only organised, the swells deepen their spacing as if making room for muscle. Above them, clouds gather in stacked grey ranks, one behind another, while the wind turns uncertain and starts testing the sails from two directions at once. Men who were discussing oranges stop discussing oranges. That is how you know the weather has crossed some invisible threshold. Rook is everywhere and nowhere, one moment at the helm, the next by the mainmast, then halfway up the quarterdeck, speaking to the mate, without raising his voice. He becomes, under threat, more legible. Not warmer, never that, but clearer. This is the side of command all seamen understand immediately. When the sea itself begins to speak, argument among men must either end or become part of the wreckage. Pike locks the stores. Mr. Vale secures his galley with the sorrowful efficiency of a man who knows pots can become missiles. Bram is sent aloft and comes down white around the mouth from the height and the wind. You are put to reefing a sail under orders so brisk they barely resemble language. Then the rain arrives not in drops, but in a slanting grey substance that seems determined to erase the world board by board. What follows is hard to narrate because it does not feel like a sequence while you are in it. It feels like an argument with gravity. Everything is wet at once. Your shirt, your lashes, the lines in your hands, the deck under your boots, the air in your throat. The sail bucks and thrashes like a living thing, offended by restraint. Water slams the hull in heavy shoulder blows. The ship rises, pauses, then drops with a depth that drags the stomach after it. Commands come through the wind in fragments and must be guessed the rest of the way. Men vanish behind sheets of rain and reappear 3 paces from where you expected them. A barrel breaks loose. 2 men fling themselves after it and are nearly taken with it. Flint Ned laughs once, not from joy, but from the kind of terror that comes out wearing the wrong coat. You haul, brace, duck, grip, miss, recover. Everything narrows to action. This is perhaps the purest thing the sea ever grants. Moments so occupied by survival that all lesser thoughts are forced silent. No oranges, no grievances, no future, only the next handhold. At some point, lightning opens the sky in a white crack, so complete it seems less a flash than a revelation. For an instant, the whole ship is drawn in sharp lines. The men bent over rope, the canted mast, the rain-like thrown chains. Rook at the helm, one hand high, coat plastered against him, face turned into the blast. Then darkness folds back, thicker than before. Thunder follows, not from above, but from all sides, rolling through the timbers and into your bones. You do not know how long the worst of it lasts. Storm time is different time. It spans, it duplicates, it fills every available space in the mind. Yet within it, there are strange little pockets of trance. Moments when the work settles into pure repetition, even amid danger. Hot. Pull this knot, hold this line, pass that hook, lean now, wait, move, again. The ship keeps teaching even in fury. Especially in fury, it teaches that a body can go on under far more noise than it believes possible, provided the next necessary action remains simple enough. And then, as all storms eventually do, unless they end you first, this one moves from immediate violence into aftermath. The rain loosens, the wind, though still hard, acquires direction again. The waves remain huge, but begin to lose that malicious irregularity that makes every step a guess. One by one, men emerge from where labour had swallowed them, soaked, shaking, breathing in short, astonished bursts, as if surprised to find breath still required. The ship itself sounds changed, not broken exactly, though perhaps it is in places you cannot yet see. Tired, certainly, the timbers groan more deeply, with the long complaining voice of something forced beyond its preference, but not beyond use. The world after a storm is never as loud as the storm itself, yet it often feels more exposed. You look around and count automatically. There is Bram, clinging to the rail and laughing in little exhausted barks. Mercer doubled over, but upright, Pike checking the lashings. The mate bleeding from one ear and too angry to notice. 2 others missing from the immediate deck, though on a ship like this that can mean injury, duty below, or the sea itself. No one says anything for several seconds. The silence is not peaceful. It is inventory. Rook gives 3 calm orders, that is all. Men obey with the dull submission of those whose muscles have not yet received permission to feel. Damaged sail is gathered, a snapped spar is secured, buckets appear as if conjured. Water is passed up from below and flung back to the sea that supplied it. The practical world returns at once, which is another strange comfort. Catastrophe, once it has spared you, demands housekeeping. It is during this labour that you feel the return of ordinary thoughts, and with them the ship's unresolved bitterness. Bram spits pink over the rail between bucket passes and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. Mercer mutters that if the captain had shared those oranges before the storm, perhaps men would have had more strength left in them. Pike tells him to save his philosophy for weather that listens. Even so, the words remain. The storm may have interrupted human conflict, but it has not cured it. If anything, it has sharpened the unfairness. Now the crew has fresh proof of its weakness and fresh reason to resent any hidden remedy. Toward evening, the clouds tear apart in long ragged bands and let through a diluted gold light so tender it seems almost apologetic. It falls over wrecked canvas, battered faces, puddled deck, and the line of the sea still heaving under leftover strength. Men move more slowly now, not from laziness, from depletion. Every object feels heavier after surviving what could have taken everything. Mr. Vale manages a pot of hot broth whose chief virtue is heat and whose second virtue is quantity. It is accepted with something like reverence. Steam rises into the cooling air. Hands cup bowls. The hull knocks gently now, as if the ocean itself has grown ashamed of its recent temper. It is one of those softer intervals the sea allows, not out of kindness, but because extremes cannot continue forever. You sit on a coil of damp line, with your bowl between your palms, and feel the heat travel through your fingers into the wrists and up the arms. A small convincing miracle. The western clouds burn along their torn edges. A flying fish, confused by the leftovers of weather, breaks the surface and skids across the wake like a tossed blade. Someone hums from near the galley, not a tune meant for anyone else, just proof that breath has become available again. Under that softening sky, it becomes possible, briefly, to imagine that shared danger has washed the ship clean of smaller hostilities. Perhaps this is why people survive storms at all. The body, overwhelmed, produces an interval of foolish hope to help itself keep going. The illusion lasts until night watch, when you see the mate leaving the captain's cabin with a jaw clenched so hard his whole face seems hinged. Behind him, in the lantern light before the door closes, a peel of orange lies curled beside an empty cup like a dare. The day after the storm is worse in a subtler way. Men are polite, not truly polite. Of course, no one aboard has suddenly turned courtly. But there is an excess of care in the way bowls are passed, tools exchanged, shoulders turned in narrow spaces. Nobody wants to strike first under full daylight, not with the ship still licking its wounds, and the sea not yet finished with its long after motion. So tempers dress themselves in civility and wait for dark. You feel it in the deck more than in the conversation. Groups form and break in new combinations. Flint Ned works beside Pike without their usual muttered friction. Bram is sent aloft twice, and each time returns by a different route across the rigging, as if carrying not messages exactly but glances. Mercer disappears below and comes back smelling unmistakably of the captain's corridor, though whether he has truly been there or only lingered near is impossible to say. Mr. Vale serves food with a stillness that would be peaceful anywhere else and deadly here. Even Rook, moving through his ship with that spare, contained authority of his, seems to step into pockets of silence already prepared for him. You think often of leaving your thoughts alone, and fail every time. What would you do for one orange? The question returns. But now it broadens. What would you do for fairness? What would men do for the proof that their hunger has a face? At dusk, the sea lays itself down in a manner so smooth, it seems conspiratorial. There is barely enough wind to hold the sails with dignity. The ship glides, rather than presses forward. Sunset spreads low and coppery beneath a bank of thinning cloud, turning every rope edge gold for a minute before the light slips. It is a beautiful evening, in the kind of indecent way only dangerous lives can understand. The deck even smells cleaner after the storm, salt having washed away some portion of the old ingrained foulness. Men breathe deeper because of it, voices lower. For anyone who did not know better, this would look like peace. That is exactly why it is not. You are on late watch, when the captain rings for the changing of duty. The bell sounds ordinary enough, a single measured note. Then, a little later, another, though no formal reason requires it. Heads turn. Bram, across the deck, stills with a coil of line in his hands. Pike is nowhere visible. Mercer has vanished again. The mate strides from the quarterdeck toward the sound, stops halfway, and appears to reconsider whatever certainty brought him there. No one announces mutiny. Men are too tired for such theatrical clarity. Instead, the ship enters a new tempo. Quick feet, stopped breath. A lantern shuttered, something metallic tapped softly against wood. You understand, all at once, and with remarkable uselessness, that the thing long forming in hints has reached the stage where no one will explain it to you. Explanations are for before. Now there is only position. Bram passes near enough to brush your sleeve and says, without moving his lips much, that if trouble begins, you are to keep low and stay away from the captain's door unless you enjoy becoming part of history in the wrong way. Then he has gone into the dark as if absorbed by it. You remain where you are for a moment because movement itself seems incriminating. The sea hushes along the hull. Rigging ticks lightly overhead. Somewhere below deck, a sleepy snore continues, absurdly calm, from one of the off-watch men, not yet invited into the night's decision. That tiny sound, so ordinary amid the tension, nearly undoes you. It reminds you that catastrophe, when it comes, always arrives into a world that was doing something else a moment before. Then a shout tears through the dark, brief, and cut short. After that, the ship breaks into pieces, not literal pieces. Not yet human pieces, running feet, a dropped bucket, a curse, the slap of a body against the mast. A lantern flares and throws hard gold over faces. Suddenly sharp with intent, you see Mercer grappling with the mate near the main hatch, not elegantly, but with the clumsy desperation of men wearing hunger and fatigue like extra weights. Pike comes out of the shadows with a belaying pin in his hand and the sorrowful expression of a magistrate performing an unpleasant duty. Bram appears on the quarterdeck rail above you, all elbows and speed, then vanishes again toward the stern. Someone yells for the stores. Someone else yells for the helm. Neither seems like the right answer, and both may be. You drop instinctively behind a barrel as a knife glances off the deck, 2 arm lengths away, and skids with a bright insect sound into darkness. The choice feels cowardly, and therefore sensible. Around you the ship is all fragment. There is no grand line of battle, no clean division of loyal and disloyal. Only little pockets of decision colliding in too little space. Men who meant only to threaten now striking, because they are frightened. Men who had not chosen a side, being assigned one by proximity. Men shouting names that vanish under the scrape of boots and the slap of loose rope. Through it all, the sea continues its gentle breathing under the hull, indifferent and maddeningly calm. At some point, the captain's cabin door flies open, light spills across the wet boards. In it, just for an instant, you see the desk overturned, a chair on its side, Pike's ledger on the floor, and on the threshold, rolling in a ridiculous little arc before coming to rest against a scupper. An orange, one real orange, whole, bright, entirely out of proportion to the violence around it. A man lunges for the cabin. Rook meets him in the doorway, not with a roar, but with one efficient movement, and the man folds out of sight. You never even see the blade. That is the terrible thing about skill. It can be quieter than rage. Then the mate, bleeding from the temple and half blind with it, barrels into the captain from the side. Bram is suddenly there too. Mercer shouts that the stores belong to the crew. Flint Ned, whether loyal or opportunistic, or simply drunk on the fact that events have finally justified his suspicions, swings a length of rope weighted with something hard. The lamp goes over, the light changes. For a few seconds, the whole stern is lit only by the moon and the smeared glow from the half-open cabin. The orange rolls again. If this were a different kind of story, this would be the moment of noble declaration, of justice named aloud, of wrongs counted and settled. But pirate ships are not theatres, and hungry men are poor speechmakers. The fight, if it can be called that, dissolves into noise. Shoving, breath, impact, wood, a cry, a body stumbling into you, hard enough to steal the air from your chest. You go down on one knee. The deck comes close and smells of salt, old tar, and fresh blood all at once. Someone's boot lands beside your hand. Someone else falls across the barrel where you had hidden. There is a cracking sound from somewhere above that may be a spar complaining or a wrist giving way. And then it is over, not because anyone wins cleanly, but because exhaustion reaches the center first. When you stand again, unsteady and stupid with the speed of it all, the stern is littered with men trying to breathe around pain. The mate is down and cursing in a reduced voice. Pike sits against the rail holding his side. Bram has one sleeve dark to the elbow. Mercer is nowhere in sight. Flint Ned is on his knees, staring at his own hands as though surprised to find them involved. The captain is gone. At first you think he must have fallen, or fled below, or ducked into some part of the ship your dazzled sight cannot account for. But the cabin stands open, the deck beyond it is empty. The helm turns a little in the loose wind and rights itself. There is no sign of him, except the overturned room, the one rolling orange, and a narrow peel on the desk, catching moonlight like a curl of flame. No one speaks for several breaths. The mutiny, if this was mutiny, has broken on a strange shore. There is no triumphant claim, no sudden new order, only damage and the eerie softness of the sea carrying the ship onward while the old authority has slipped somewhere out of sight. Bram stoops at last, picks up the orange and simply looks at it. He does not eat it, that would be too simple, too vulgar for the moment. He only turns it in his hand, as if trying to understand what exact quantity of misery can gather itself around one bright object. Then, because pirate life never allows a clean ending to any one trouble, someone on the far rail shouts that there are sails to the east. The sail on the horizon is at first only a dark tooth against paling sky. Dawn has begun its slow work in the east, though no one aboard would swear how long the fighting consumed. It may have been minutes, it may have been half the night. Time, once broken by fear, takes a while to remember its old shape. What matters is that another vessel is out there, and this one is not ready to be seen. Damage makes itself known in the thin light. A torn line slaps intermittently against the mast like a loose thought. One of the smaller yards hangs at the wrong angle. The after rail has splintered where bodies hit it. The mate, still living and furious at the inconvenience, cannot rise without help. Pike can stand but not fully straight. Mercer appears from below, with a face gone pale under grime, and a cut over one eye, and says, in the tone of a man reporting weather, that the captain's boat is missing. So are 2 water skins, a pistol, and the better part of the chart case. No one is surprised enough. Perhaps that is the deepest insult. Rook has not merely vanished. He has behaved exactly like a man of his sort might when the arithmetic turned against him. The sight of the distant sail ought to unite the surviving crew at once. In practical terms, it does. Men move because they must. Canvas is hauled into some semblance of order. Blood is wiped where it might make the planks treacherous. Mr. Vale, who seems to have slept through the mutiny by virtue of being either deaf with exhaustion or strategically indifferent, emerges blinking into the dawn and says the galley fire is out and the kettle cracked. This somehow feels like the most serious catastrophe of the night. Bram laughs once, then winces, because laughing hurts the cut under his ribs. Yet inwardly, unity does not return so quickly. Too much has been seen, too much suspected. No one knows who struck hardest, who hesitated, who meant justice, who merely followed motion, who looked toward the captain's stores with thoughts of fairness, and who with thoughts of possession. The old order is gone, but nothing clean has taken its place. The ship feels like a sentence, after a word has been erased from the middle. It continues, but with a gap everyone notices the other vessel remains far enough off that details blur. Merchant, perhaps, privateer, another pirate. The truth matters less than the possibility. A leaderless battered ship is a tempting object on any sea. Pike climbs stiffly to the quarterdeck and shades his eyes. After a time he says, "It may pass without interest if we appear purposeful." Mercer replies that a crippled gull can look purposeful to a shark. Pike tells him to save poetry for a less useful hour. You find yourself at the pump beside Bram, working the handle in slow alternation while seawater mixed with stormwater and some less nameable fluids rises from below and pours back into the sea. The movement is simple, heavy, repetitive, up, down, up, down. Sleep could almost enter through the rhythm if fear were not still warm in the body. Bram, who the night before held an orange like a holy object, says very quietly that he could smell the captain on the missing boat line. Not perfume orange, he says it with no anger now, only wonder, as if even betrayal becomes dreamlike when dawn reaches it. The sun comes up in diluted bands through shredded cloud. It is not a triumphant sunrise. The light falls flat over the deck, revealing every bruise and split knuckle with honest discourtesy. Yet light itself has a calming power after a night like that. Once the world is visible, imagination loses some of its authority. The distant sail becomes only a ship, the blood only blood, the missing captain only absent. You would think clarity brings comfort, instead it brings fatigue. You are simply too tired to be dramatic about what has happened. By mid-morning, the strange sail alters course slightly southward, and, whether from mercy, disinterest, or bad visibility, leaves you to your damaged drifting republic. Men notice its departure, but do not cheer. Relief without strength to celebrate feels a great deal like numbness. Then, practical questions descend in a slow, hard rain. Who commands? What provisions remain? How much water was taken? Can the damaged rig hold in stronger wind? Is the mate to be trusted or even kept? Pike answers the first question by refusing it. He says command can wait until the hull stops leaking and the men stop swaying. On that point, everyone agrees. Work comes first, politics later. Pirate democracy, you learn, is most persuasive when the bilge is rising. Below the practical concerns, another grief works quietly. The myth has finally failed, not the myth told to boys ashore. That one died on your first day, the smaller myth, the one you let yourself believe after weeks of shared labour and shared misery. That men might at least suffer honestly together, that even unfair systems aboard could be bent toward rough fellowship. Rook's missing boat and stolen water skins end that hope more thoroughly than any knife could. He did not merely keep oranges, he kept escape. Still, the sea insists on repetition. The pump rises and falls, The bucket line passes hand to hand. Mr. Vale, cursing all ideologies equally, manages by noon to produce a thin hot mash from what stores remain. The warmth of it calms the crew more than any speech would. Men eat sitting wherever they dropped when the immediate jobs were done. Pike breaks the lone remaining orange into ragged wedges, not ceremonially, not as a reward, only because to keep it whole now would be obscene. Each surviving hand gets a little piece, no larger than 2 bites. When your portion reaches you, the smell comes first, so vivid it almost hurts. Bright, living, impossible, you hold it under your nose longer than you intend. Around the deck, others are doing the same. For one silent moment, the whole ship shares a single fragrance, and you understand how hunger can turn scent into memory before the mouth has even touched it. The taste is sharper than any dream managed, acid, sweetness, sunlight preserved in flesh. You close your eyes while chewing, not from reverence, but because the body has no other adequate response. When you swallow, the world remains broken exactly as before, yet something in you has been reminded it was meant for more than salt and rot. By late afternoon, land birds begin appearing, 1 and then 3, drifting over the mast and away westward. Pike watches them longer than he watched the strange sail. He says nothing. He does not have to. Everyone aboard knows what birds may mean after enough days out. Water, shoals, sand, maybe a cove, maybe an island too small for maps and too large to ignore. The ship, wounded and uncertain, turns a degree to follow where the birds came from. No one objects after mutiny, storm, hidden fruit, and the disappearance of a captain. Even a rumour of land feels less like destination than permission to stop enduring motion for a while. Toward evening, the sea goes smooth again, as it always seems to after human disasters, and the deck settles into a hush beyond mere exhaustion. Men wrap cloth around cuts. Bram sleeps where he sits with his head against a coil of rope. The mate, finally too weak for anger, lies under a bit of sail and stares at the mast as if trying to remember how command ever looked from below. Pike keeps watch. Mr. Vale polishes a spoon with grave concentration, perhaps because it is one of the few objects aboard still willing to become cleaner. You lean against the rail and watch the wake fade into violet dusk. Behind you the ship mutters in its timbers. Ahead, unseen but increasingly believed in, there may be a line of sand or green or rock waiting to interrupt the water. The thought should feel hopeful. Instead it feels soft, distant, almost sleepy. After enough hardship, even rescue loses its sharp edges and becomes just another place where the body might finally lie down. Land appears the next morning as a grey uncertainty, low against the brightness, then as a pale strip, then as several humps of rock with one shoulder of green laid across them like cloth. No one announces it loudly. The crew has spent too much emotion to waste any on cheering. Heads simply lift, hands pause. Pike studies the line of it. Mr. Vale squints and says if there are pigs on that island, he will forgive God for certain previous decisions. Bram, still weak and smiling through it, says even a coconut would look to him like a king's apology. The approach takes hours, because everything at sea takes longer than the eye permits itself to expect. The water shifts from deep blue to a clearer green-grey. Birds multiply. The air changes first, carrying a smell unlike the ship's permanent stew of tar and man. Damp earth, leaves, sun on stone, a sweetness from vegetation, too distant to name. The change works through the crew, almost visibly. Shoulders drop, breaths deepen. Even the wounded seem to remember painfully that there are scents in the world not made by confinement. The cay, or island, or whatever proper term a mapmaker would use for it, proves no paradise. It has no broad welcoming beach fit for paintings. A narrow crescent of sand lies between black rocks and scrub twisted low by weather. Beyond that rises thicker green, then a modest interior height, where a few taller trees stand together, their crowns moving in a breeze you cannot yet feel. Yet, after the weeks behind you, it looks impossibly generous. It is not the prettiness of the place that matters. It is the stillness, the promise that the ground once reached will not keep shifting under every thought. Bringing the ship in close enough for boats is awkward work performed by men held together now, mostly by habit. The mate can barely stand, but insists on directing the soundings, until Pike calmly ignores him and takes the line himself. Bram and Mercer lower the cutter. You climb down with them, along with 2 casks, a sack of miserable provisions, Mr. Vale's treasured knives wrapped in cloth, and 1 bent kettle salvaged from the galley with all the seriousness of a relic. The boat settles under the weight and pushes away, crossing that final strip of water. Feels unreal. The island is near enough for you to make out individual leaves and the whitened curve of dead branches above the tide line. Little fish scatter under the oars. The sea here is clear enough to show sand ripples below. After so long afloat, the sight of a bottom beneath water feels intimate, almost to the point of embarrassment, as though the ocean has suddenly forgotten to hide itself. When the boat grounds, nobody leaps heroically ashore. Bram slides over the side and nearly falls because his legs have remembered the motion of the ship too well. Mercer swears at the sand for moving less than expected. You step down last with 1 hand on the cask and feel the beach take your weight in silence. It is warmer than deck planks ever were, softer too, though broken shells nip at the soles through worn boots. The land does not sway. This shocks you more than any cannon ever could. For a moment your body keeps making little corrections for a motion that is no longer there. The world feels strangely overstable, as if reality has become too firm. Several of the men simply stand and look outward for a while, back toward the ship, riding beyond the shallows. It is difficult to say what each sees: a ruined workplace, a narrow salvation, a floating prison, a long mistake. For you, it has already become something else. A machine of repetition carrying all the tired versions of yourself. You no longer have strength to sort through. From here, with birds crossing the sky and surf murmuring in place of bilge and rope, the ship looks almost innocent. The day is spent in the humble business of temporary survival. Water first, Pike leads a search inland, while the others unload what matters most. You go with Bram along a faint track under scrub and into a patch of shade so cool and leafy that it seems indecent after weeks of exposed deck. The ground is springy with old leaves. Insects hum lazily rather than swarm angrily. Somewhere farther in, unseen, a bird issues 3 clean notes that sound less like warning than conversation. You had forgotten how layered land can be. At sea there is air, wood, water, sky. Here there is bark, fern, damp soil, seed pods. The smell of green things heating under sun, the creak of branches, the click of beetles in hidden places, the tiny internal weather of shade. You find fresh water in the shallowest imaginable trickle, a seat between stones at the foot of the rise, and fall to it with a reverence that would embarrass any earlier version of you. The taste is mineral, cool, faintly leaf-stained, perfect. You drink too fast. Pike makes everyone stop, breathe, fill the skins properly, drink again. Even relief, he says, can kill if approached like a pirate. It is perhaps the best joke he has ever told, though no one laughs very hard. Back on the beach, the cutter goes twice more to fetch the remaining useful goods and the men not fit to row. By sunset, There is the suggestion of a camp under the taller trees, a bit of sailcloth stretched for shade, the casks set upright. A fire ringed in stones. Mr. Vale crouched over the bent kettle, as if willing civilization to continue through cookery alone. The mate lies apart with his injured leg bound, and his authority evaporated. No one has formally replaced him. No one seems eager to name any rank at all, while standing on borrowed sand. For the first time in many days, the future feels not promising, but merely unwritten. Evening on land arrives differently. The light does not broaden endlessly, but is interrupted, caught in leaves, broken by trunks reddened over rock. The sea beyond the beach takes the low sun and gives it back in shattered pieces. Crabs emerge with tiny scandalized steps from holes near the dunes. A breeze comes off the water, carrying less salt than before and more cool. Men sit around the first true fire they have seen in too long, letting their hands open toward it. The flames are small. The comfort is not Mr. Vale produces a stew from fish, a few beans, and something green Bram insists is edible because a bird was pecking near it. The stew tastes of smoke and recovery. It may be the best meal you have ever had, simply because the spoon rises to your mouth without the ship moving underneath the motion. Around the fire, conversation returns in low strips. Not about mutiny, not about blame. Men speak instead of ordinary things, as if rediscovering them. The feel of grass under bare feet. The remembered smell of market oranges in a port 2 years ago. A woman who sold hot bread near a quay in Havana, a dog one man had as a child. The sound rain makes on a roof instead of a sail. Memory, once fed and warmed, grows domestic very quickly. It is a softer kind of evening at last, with firelight, bowls in hand, surf at a distance, a fixed horizon, and the ship riding quietly offshore like a troublesome thought not yet dealt with. You let the sound of the water on sand slip under the talk. In and out, not the hard slap of sea on hull, but the softer work of waves letting go. Night deepens, stars appear through gaps in the leaves. One by one, the men settle where they can, wrapped in spare cloth, or simply trusting fatigue to keep them warm. You lie on a patch of sand packed smooth under the sailcloth and wait for your body to accept that it is allowed to rest without swaying. It takes time. Even with the ground steady, some inner part of you keeps rocking. Yet the surf persists in its patient rhythm, and after a while it teaches the body a new motion to follow. Just before sleep reaches you, Bram turns in the dark and says he can still smell the orange on his hands, though he has washed them twice. You lift your own palm to your face. Nothing remains there now but smoke, salt, and skin. Still, the mind supplies the brightness anyway, beyond the sailcloth. The surf keeps laying down and gathering back its narrow silver edge, again and again, as if the sea has decided to speak more gently for a while. You listen until the fire settles, the voice is thin, and the whole long voyage becomes only lie. Water, breath, and darkness, still moving somewhere just beyond the trees.